Welcome to the WMU Alumni Webinar Series. Today's title is Understanding the Effects of COVID-19 on Seafarers. So we have 4 panelists. Basically, this webinar offers the participants a unique opportunity to engage with a variety of international researchers who are examining the effect of COVID-19 on seafarers. The 4 panel of researchers are contributing to the discussions. Before we start, I would like to explain the structure of today's webinar. So from the first panel to the fourth panel, one by one, we will make a short presentation. And after each short presentation, we might have the opportunity to take 1 or 2 quick questions. And after all the presentations are done, we are going to have a panel discussions where we invite the questions from the audience. And also during the presentation, you are more than welcome to use the chat boxes to input your questions and engage with other participants. So please feel free to engage with the panelists as well as the participants. My name is Dr. Momoko Kitada, today's moderator at WMU. And before taking too long, I would like to introduce the first panel. Speaker is the Dr. Birgit Parkstad. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that the Birgit, you can start sharing your screen. So this is the presentations, research collaborations by the 4 universities, Dr. Birgit Parkstad, Dr. Michelle Gretsch, Dr. Rikke Björk Jensen, and myself, Momoko Kitada. Birgit, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I would like to present the results from preliminary analysis from our research project on seafarers' experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is, as Momoko just explained, a joint project by myself, Michelle, Momoko, and Rikke. The research questions that we were focused on were the following. First, how is the pandemic actually affecting seafarers who were on board of international vessels? Second, what are the effects on mental health and exhaustion? And third, what factors might mitigate the effects of the pandemic? For instance, what kind of support is available and what kind of support would be needed? We collected data through an online survey over the summer among seafarers who were at the time on board when they completed the survey. And the survey was distributed by social partners as well as maritime training institutions and many individuals and organizations in ports around the world as far as the local situation permitted. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of those who helped to distribute the survey, as well as the seafarers who took the time to participate in the survey and answer the questions. This report or this presentation is based on responses from 671 seafarers. As you see here from the statistics, a lot of them were officers, 72.5% were officers, and many of them were from the Philippines, but also a large number of respondents from Northern European countries and also very many on vessels from Northern European flag states. So this is not quite representative of the world fleet as a whole. Concerning the effects of the pandemic, most of the respondents experienced serious effects of the pandemic on crew changes, as well as on ship-shore interactions. Other areas such as employment, the non-work life on board, and getting supplies, there you see an almost 50-50 split between those who experienced a high or very high impact of the pandemic and those who reported that there was no impact or almost no impact on these aspects. The challenge that was we had an open question about challenges, and the challenge that came up most often was mentioned by 66% were challenges related to crew changes. And this included situations where crew changes were cancelled or limited, as well as situations where crew changes were delayed and there was a lot of uncertainty about crew changes. And thirdly, the difficulty of travel between ship and home. So the other aspect that was mentioned a lot, 54.1% of the respondents mentioned this, was ship-shore interactions, which includes shore leave. For example, that it was very difficult or even impossible to go ashore, even for medical care, but also for shopping, for personal purchases, for recreation, and so on. And related to that, it was in some cases difficult for respondents, they said, to get supplies, both supplies for the ship, like spare parts, but also supplies for the crew. Food was mentioned, for example. Another area of challenges related to the situation on board, this included a high workload due to extra work related to COVID, which often resulted in fatigue and stress, high levels of anxiety. Many also reported quite high levels of tensions on board. And a challenge then was also how to maintain the morale and how to maintain a high spirit among the crew. These challenges are also reflected in other questions that we asked about mental health. You see here that about 20% of the respondents reported anxiety symptoms almost every day or every day during the last 7 days, and 15 to 20% reported symptoms of depression almost every day or every day during the last 7 days. So these are quite high levels. You also see relatively high levels of exhaustion, in particular concerning exhaustion, feeling very tired and having sleeping problems. And this was reported by almost 20%, over 20% every day or almost every day during the last 7 days. So this is also quite high levels here. What kind of support was available? There was, as you see here, a lot of almost a 50-50 split between those who report that they received a lot of support and that they received enough support, and those who said that they did not receive a lot of support and they did not receive enough support. The main sources of support that were mentioned were family and friends and social media. So you see how internet connections might be important. And another important source of support that was mentioned very frequently was the shipping company. However, this was, when we looked at the types of support provided by the companies, this also varied a lot, but in many cases was limited to information and advice and recommendations on how to organize onboard procedures and onboard precautions. However, these were not always easy to implement by the crew on board. About 50% said they received help concerning crew changes, 50% said they did not receive any help concerning crew changes from their company. We also asked people what kind of support they would need, if anything. And these are the responses, and you see here there are also some practical implications entailed in this. The most frequently mentioned type of support that would be welcome was crew changes for all nationalities, not just for those where it was easy to arrange, but for all crew members regardless of nationality. In addition, policies, establishing best practices and clear, simple and consistent policies in different countries and in different ports, better internet and communication, and also a change in the negative attitudes towards seafarers who were sometimes felt that they were treated as dangerous or almost like trash by the local authorities or other local personnel they were in contact with, and they would like to be recognized for their contributions as key workers. Other points that were mentioned were getting supplies, making shore leave easier, pay and job security, as well as more support and information from the company, as well as mental health support for the crew and also for the family at home. This was a very quick overview of some of the first findings. We are currently analyzing the results still, and we hope that the report will be ready in mid-December. I will be happy to answer some questions if there's time now, and otherwise later. Otherwise, you can also contact me after the seminar. And I would like to end by again thanking those of you who helped to distribute the survey, and most of all those of you who participated in the survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Birgit, for keeping the time. That's a very informative presentations from the survey within a very short time. We received a couple of questions. Some questions might be also good for the other speakers. However, maybe I would just start introducing some questions. So one of the questions comes from Salvatore from Bahamas. So he's mentioning that none was providing the medical care from the shore side, even if it's the most needed. So some ships actually have to cross the Pacific to go to Miami to get support. Does the study also support this element? And the second question might be from the Commander Sajid Hussain from Bangladesh, that the seafarers also deserve some special allowance due to the working during the corona challenges. Is there any data sort of complement this kind of claims, Birgit?
Yes, so concerning medical care, this was one of the things that came up a lot with regard to the challenges that people experience. So many of the challenges related to shore leave, as I said, and they're often shore leave for medical purposes. So visiting a doctor, visiting a dentist, these kind of things were really important and very difficult for people to arrange. So yes, we see this in the data. Yes, and also about special allowances, I think this is something that Helen in her presentation might say more about, but yes, pay was also a concern to have the financial security both for themselves and their families, which many also were worried about the situation of the family at home. And one thing that also came up was that many were concerned about future employment possibilities. So the idea was, if I leave the ship now and go home, will I be able to go back to the ship again and work again? Or will I then be unemployed because I can't get back to the ship? So in that way, crew changes also had an effect on the employment security. And this, of course, then also affects the pay. And yeah, so yes, this came up in the data as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think because of the time that although we are receiving many questions, we will probably move to the next presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to introduce the panel two, Dr. Helen Debru from the Wasatch Maritime School, the Solent University, as well as the Emma Watworth is the co-researcher. So Helen, you can share your screen.
Very much.
And thank you very much for all the questions from the audience. We will try to answer as much as possible.
Okay, hello, my name is Helen Devereux, and this is a project I have been working on with a colleague, Dr. Emma Wadsworth, at Solent University in the UK. And also need to mention that this is something we've been doing with the support of Nautilus International, the Seafarers Trade Union here in the UK, and also the Merchant Navy Welfare Board, which is the umbrella organisation for charities which support merchant seafarers as well in the UK. So big thanks to all of those people who've been working with me on this. So about the project, firstly, to say it is a longitudinal study. So what I'm talking about here are the preliminary findings from the first questionnaire. So this questionnaire was run between July and August 2020. And there will be a second questionnaire in early 2021. So we haven't determined the exact date for this yet. The reason being we were kind of waiting to see what was happening in the world. Things like the vaccine, how things are kind of changing with flights and this kind of thing, and what's happening to release it at a time when we thought we would get the kind of most valuable data. Okay, so this first questionnaire that I'm presenting, very much the preliminary findings at this stage, and it is based on 216 respondents who completed an online questionnaire. So the questionnaire was primarily distributed via social media. I'm a former seafarer, I'm married to a seafarer, very much using kind of contacts and connections like that, things like Facebook groups and that kind of thing, and sending it as far and wide as we could. We targeted British seafarers, okay, so a bit different from the other questionnaires in the sense that ours is primarily for British seafarers, okay, and we gained respondents basically across the ranks and across the various sectors of the industry. So pretty much every sector that you could think of, we had some respondents from. Perhaps the biggest we got was cruise ship, interestingly. About 25% of our respondents identified as being in the cruise ship industry. Okay. And again, Nautilus and Merchant Navy Welfare Board helped us to distribute it by their channels as well, and thanks very much for that. So I am not going to go through all of the findings. I've got 7 or 8 minutes, so very much just kind of pick one key thing that I and Emma found particularly interesting, and that is about the employment terms and conditions of the seafarers who filled in the survey, and how that their responses were different depending on this. So most of the seafarers, so 72%, described their contract as permanent. Okay, and 18% said they had temporary or voyage contracts. If we look at the data that the closest data we've got with this is kind of very typical for UK industry. If we look at the sort of nationalities of seafarers, would be quite different. Okay, some nationalities much higher numbers of temporary employed seafarers, but for the UK, that's about representative, we think, at the moment. Okay. And how individuals were employed made a number of significant differences. So more seafarers with permanent contracts had been joining the vessel as normal. So 40% of seafarers with permanent contracts had joined the vessel as normal, compared to 10% who were temporarily employed. Fewer seafarers with permanent contracts had not joined a ship as scheduled and were not being paid. Okay, and fewer seafarers with permanent contracts had been made redundant or had not had a contract renewed. Okay, so very much those who were employed on a permanent contract had kind of less issues than those who were employed on the sort of standard voyage temporary contracts, if you like. Again, fewer seafarers with permanent contracts reported an impact on their finances, so 31% compared to 63%, and fewer seafarers with permanent contracts reported being more likely to leave the industry. Okay, so one of the things we were particularly interested in the questionnaire was about whether people would recommend the industry. Here in the UK, we know that there's a shortage, or there's a predicted shortage of seafarers in the coming years. I'm quite interested in whether kind of current seafarers are happy to recommend the industry to possible newcomers. And also not only recruitment, but retention. Okay, if the pandemic was more likely to cause seafarers, or less likely to leave the industry. And certainly on social media, what we were seeing was a lot of seafarers saying, you know, that's it, I'm not going back, I'm done with this, I'm finding something else, and that kind of thing. Okay, so fewer seafarers with permanent contracts reported being less likely to recommend seafaring. Okay, so again, those who were permanently employed really, you know, more likely to recommend it, and less likely to leave the industry. And fewer seafarers with permanent contracts reported an impact on their career. Okay, so those who were on temporary contracts, on voyage contracts, nearly half, sorry, 80% reported an impact on their career of the pandemic. So one of the things we were particularly interested in is the financial implications. So the UK is fairly unusual in the tax scheme that it's got for seafarers, in that the seafarers pay a significantly less amount of tax if they're out of the country for a certain amount of days. So obviously, with people not being able to crew change, these people weren't going to be out of the country and were therefore going to have to pay tax on the salary they'd already earned. But also particularly interesting, because many of the cruise ships have been laid up within UK waters, so not in port, but within within sort of UK water limits. Many of these seafarers are going to have to pay tax even though they'd actually been on board. So obviously there's quite a lot of disgruntlement about that. The UK government introduced, like many of the governments, a furlough scheme for workers in the UK in order to kind of protect jobs. What some of the seafarers reported, that they, due to how the furlough scheme was being applied, obviously it was predominantly designed for shore workers in sort of standard employment, they were going to lose money. So one hotel department worker, for example, reported having 80% of the basic salary paid only during the months that it doesn't support me. I've lost 2 months of wages already. Okay. Several of the respondents reported that they had job offers withdrawn. So people who were kind of expecting a voyage contract had then had this voyage contract withdrawn at the last second. So one deck officer on a general cargo vessel said, I had a job offer withdrawn in April. I spent 3 months unemployed before being offered a temporary contract with another company, but at approximately 50% of my previous salary. So obviously a significant financial implication there for that seafarer. And finally, an individual on a cruise ship reported that they'd had to seek additional employment to cover costs whilst they wait to be offered a new contract at sea, whenever that may be. I guess there's some quite serious financial implications, and these were felt, perhaps unsurprisingly, most heavily by those who are employed on temporary contracts rather than those that are on permanent contracts. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Excellent presentations. So there are questions for you, and the first question is about those who has the permanent contracts. Are they like officers, or that's the first questions. And the second question is that well, it may not be a question, but Salvatore mentioned that he actually heard a lot about those concessionary staff working on board. They didn't get any basic salary because they are just locked on the vessels. So does your findings anything somehow related to this issue?
So the first question, actually, in the UK is fairly unusual in that the ratings are as likely to be employed on permanent contracts as the officers, and this is primarily due to the companies that employ British ratings. So particularly kind of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and these kind of companies which used permanent contracts rather than temporary contracts. So yeah, the answer to that is actually that the ratings were as likely to be employed on permanent contracts as the officers were, which is kind of a bit of an anomaly for the UK, if you like, if you compare it to many other countries. Sorry, second question. Yeah, so we didn't actually get anyone in ours that said they weren't being paid on board. But obviously, mostly that they were worried that they were on board and were not going to have their tax days, if you like, enough days out of the country to get the tax kind of bonus that they're expecting. So basically, in the UK, that means you kind of end up paying 30% extra back to the government than you would have previously done if you'd been out of the country as had been planned. So no, we didn't. There was no responses that said they hadn't been paid whilst on board. But plenty saying that actually they were going to end up paying this tax that they hadn't been expecting to pay.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Yeah, I think probably that many things are going around the world. So, but of course, definitely the case study in the UK would help us to understand how situation is, putting a pressure on the seafarers as much as how it shouldn't be. Okay, so thank you very much. We will move to the panel 3, which is the Dr. Anna Sliskovic. If you can share your screen, Anna. She's an associate professor, Department of Psychology, University of Zadar, Croatia. You can start your presentation, Anna.
Thank you, Momoko. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Anna Sliskovic and I come from University of Zadar in Croatia. My research interests include stress in seafarers. The declaration of world pandemic in March this year prompted me to do this study, in which I simply wanted to ask seafarers, how are they? We all know, and in that moment in March this year, it was clear that preventive measures related to world pandemic will cause prolonged stay on board and at home for seafarers. Seafarers really should be recognized as key workers, since they have an essential role in keeping the world moving. However, the question is, are they treated as key workers, not only during this pandemic, but also during the normal circumstances? Actually, many studies which are done before COVID-19 show that in spite of many advances in maritime sector, seafaring is still regarded as demanding, stressful and high-risk occupation. So the Croatian old saying that seafarer life is a bread with 7 crusts is still a good illustration of their profession. Actually, seafarers face with many stressors in their occupation. Actually, this list is very, very long, and these stressors may lead to negative consequences on both individual and organizational level. So in this context, world pandemic imposed as an additional threat to seafarers' well-being. One Croatian seafarer said, "We now have one more crust named COVID-19." So the basic aim of my study was to describe well-being of seafarers who are both located on board and at home in the context of this pandemic, while using their personal experiences as the main data source. Sample involved 752 seafarers from the international market. 40% of them were on board and at the time of participation, and 60% of them were at home. The sample was convenient, but it was also very heterogeneous regarding basic demographic and working characteristics such as gender, age, type of ship, ranks, nationality, and so on. I won't go in details with it. Maybe I can go back if anyone wants details. Data was collected in spring this year, and the questionnaire included one open-ended question: how does the COVID-19 pandemic affect you personally? Results show that almost all participants reported on extensions to their stay on board and or at home. They reported a range of different experiences, from not affected at all to mild effects, and some of them reported some serious negative experiences, but analysis show that the majority of the participants reported some negative experiences. Thematic analysis showed that all these reports may be classified to 4 categories: to traits, to mental, physical, social, and economical well-being. Here you may see some examples of reports of seafarers located on board. Analysis show patterns according to which prolonged working period, along with uncertainty about data leave, may lead to some serious consequences on mental and physical plan. You may see here examples of fatigue, lack of concentration, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and so on. But for me personally, the worst part of their reports were their feelings about being abandoned or forgotten by society. So I would say that their social well-being is being deeply shaken. On the other hand, seafarers who were at home during the pandemic reported mostly about their financial situation, which includes lack of income, job insecurity, losing the job, and all this brings huge concerns to whole families. To conclude this short presentation, I would say that seafarers on board mostly reported about threatened social, mental, and physical well-being, and this have serious repercussions on for health, work efficiency, and onboard safety. On the other hand, threatened economical well-being reflects on health and motivations to work in maritime sector. In sum, I would say that seafarers who participated in this study described their reality as far away from the concept of key workers. In spite of providing a vital service to the world, they do not see the respect of their human rights. My main question is, what has changed since spring? Well, for months, international maritime and transport organizations were lobbying governments for revised regulation, which would enable crew changes. However, in spite of many calls and recommendations, in this moment, thousands of seafarers are stuck at sea for endless months, and in some cases more than a year. That's all for me for now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's very, very interesting presentation, also with lots of seafarers' voices, directly also quoted from your the study. So there are a lot of questions, but maybe I would like to ask you, you mentioned the social, mental, physical well-being, and also economic well-being. So there are 4 well-beings that you identified. Are they equally weighted? I mean, you know, from your findings, or is there anything striking, you know, outstanding out of these 4 elements?
Seafarers who were on board reported mostly on mental well-being and social well-being. And seafarers who were at home reported mostly on economic well-being. So the weights were different for 2 sub-samples.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think we are a little bit pushing the time, so pressing the time. So maybe we would move to the panel 4. Ms. Joanne Stokes, the Senior Principal Human Factors Consultant, Lloyd's Register, and her colleague, co-researchers, Dr. Volkan Arslan is also ready for taking the questions maybe at the panel discussions later. Thank you, Joanne. You can unmute.
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Apologies for that. Okay, thank you. So my name's Joanne Stokes. I work for Lloyd's Register, and my colleague is also on the session, Dr. Volkan Arslan. This survey, the survey looked at respondents from seafarers and office personnel, and we looked at 3 different dimensions. So the first dimension was looking at individual mental health and well-being. We also looked at the organisational support, so how well both seafarers and office workers have been supported by their own companies during the pandemic, and also the disease management and treatment of seafarers and office workers during the pandemic. This was a partnership between Lloyd's Register, UK Chamber of Shipping, Mission to Seafarers and Safety at Sea. Brief look at demographics. As you can see, 2/3 of respondents were land-based office workers and 1/3 were ship staff. When we asked them what sectors they were from, there was a wide range of sectors from all over the world, with the main 2 respondents categories being dry bulk carriers and tankers. And we had the survey open from the day of the seafarer on the 25th of June, all the way through to the end of September. One second. So what we should say to start with is that many companies have been very proactive in their planning and management of COVID-19, both on board and in the office, and we should recognise that. However, the results do show that seafarers were less positive overall than land-based workers, and a significant minority of seafarers feel that they're quite abandoned during this pandemic. So this presentation really focuses on where we are as an industry, where we can still make significant inroads to better support seafarers. And we also mustn't forget as we go through this presentation that shoreside personnel are also finding this situation very difficult and isolating, and as such a lot of the support we actually should extend to them as well. We came up with when we analysed results, there are a number of key themes that came out of the results. The first one was around crew change reform and the value and recognition of seafarers as essential workers. We asked ship staff, where are you currently? So you can see from here that the majority were either at sea on planned contract, or they were at sea on a COVID-19 extended contract, unable to get home. We also had people on their off contract on planned leave, and off contract on COVID extended leave, so currently furloughed, temporarily unable to join the ship. And then we also had a number of people that were had been repatriated from extended contract on the vessel. We asked them how long they had been in their extended COVID-19 situations, and we can see that those at sea had been on an average of 75 days extra on their contract. For those off contract repatriated, we can see that that was even longer, as 127 days on average, so it's that 4 months. And then those that were off contract, so usually not getting paid and at home, 150 days on average. So we can see that crew change is definitely an issue. Some of the comments that we had around crew change reform were at different levels. So there were a number of comments aimed at the country levels. So, for example, this one, criticising countries for their lack of cooperation in facilitating crew changes. Others were aimed at their own companies, thinking that the company is using them as an opportunity to extend rotations and has been seen as an acceptable excuse to save money. But many of the comments were around urging shipping industry to speak with governments and IMO and ask for urgent crew change authorisations. Looking at seafarers as essential workers and their value and recognition, despite now many IMO representatives and countries designating seafarers as essential workers, the survey response clearly showed that seafarers still feel that this is not coming through. So only 8% of seafarers strongly agreed that they felt valued in their role, and only 13% strongly agreed that they were performing an essential role. Many of the comments showed that they feel abandoned, they feel disposable, that they're not getting the assistance that they require or that they need. One seafarer even suggested that they felt like that they were locked in a prison. So for me, the first theme is the message is very, very clear. The industry needs to act faster at all levels of the industry. We need to push through crew change reform and get people home. We do have the IMO recommended protocols since the survey came out for crew changeovers, and that's really good that it shows that giving advice to countries, ports, airlines, organisations on how to get crew through from home to the ships and ship to home, but it doesn't include any sort of welfare support or mental health support during those times. And we can see from the comments that actually this is still not being actuated at all levels. We also need to consistently recognise and treat our seafarers as essential workers. As I said, we've got many countries signed up now to seafarers as essential workers, but we still have the latest figures, 400,000 are still stranded at sea. So, you know, we're not enacting this, we're not showing them that they're essential workers, but they also need to be able to experience this firsthand at all the different levels. We asked them about their individual health and well-being and since the pandemic, and we can see a number of different things. We saw that almost half felt that they weren't rested. People they work with are not rested. Almost half said that their own sleep has been affected and that they're not eating as much as they were. They don't join in. Over a third said they didn't actively join in social activities and they weren't exercising as much. Almost half said they worry about things they can't control. On the other hand, 86% said they were aware of their own mental health and they could see when others are struggling. They also said that they were able to focus on the task at hand and were able still to make day-to-day decisions. But for me, the data shows that many seafarers and land-based workers are more tired than usual. We can see that they're taking less exercise and are working at a time where they're experiencing higher than usual anxiety. I think that these actually are all ingredients that can lead operationally to reduced vigilance, narrowing of attentional capability and poorer decision making. So really a possible reduced capacity to assess their own performance and to perform. The current working environment on board, for me, represents a recipe for higher potential of human error, leading to a lot more near misses, incidents and accidents, although I don't currently have data to support that at the moment. In terms of the organisational support to seafarers, we asked them to rate their effectiveness from 1 to 10, where 10 is excellent. And we can see that the average was 6.29, which is good. You know, we can see that then the company support is being effective, but there's much more room for improvement. We asked about access to professional support in terms of mental health. Only 50% seafarers said they had that access, and out of that, when we asked them why they didn't use it, majority of the responses were because of the stigmatism associated with mental health. They're worried that they will be looked down on, they'll have negative effects on their employment, and one person actually said that somebody had been fired. Can everybody hear me? It says my connection is unstable. I'm going to carry on. Yes, other people said, okay, thank you. Other people said that they didn't need to access the professional support, or they had support from their family. However, looking wider on organisational support, 3/4 said they weren't receiving welfare checks from shore. 54% said they weren't being actively helped to manage their stress. Almost half said that the company isn't taking extra steps to help with their health and well-being. And almost 2/3 said that they've got no access to financial advice, where they were worried about their finances. In terms of social downtime, over 1/4 said that their internet connectivity didn't allow them to talk to friends and family, and over 20% said that they couldn't do this frequently. On the upside, 85% said they had good access to gym equipment, but again, 1/4 of people are not exercising as much. And the comments really were, in terms of social downtime, were centered around the lack of social activities on board and asking why we have to socially distance on board when we're effectively in a bubble or as one family having quarantine before we got on board. And as you can imagine, many of the comments were around having better internet connectivity and Wi-Fi access for all. So in terms of mental and physical well-being, again, I think the message is clear. We need to promote mental health. We need to remove the stigma associated with mental health, and we need to provide those tools. So we need to provide health and well-being professional support to all seafarers and all office workers, in my view. And there are a lot of mental health resources out there from the World Health Organization, lots of different types from across different industries, but also in the maritime industry with the UK Chamber of Shipping, MCA guides, and plenty of other resources. From the results, I think we need to provide better onboard training on signs of our own fatigue, our own mental and physical health, but also seeing that in other people and encouraging open discussions so that the stigma is reduced. We can also do this by engaging senior managers in promoting mental health and well-being. And I've seen it in some organisations doing it through podcasts or being physically available where possible. And following this up by enacting it at the operational level so seafarers can see and feel this trust. And then, as we've said, provide better social downtime with better internet connectivity, encouraging social downtime activities, trying to make those in the mess or the day room so that they're not spending all of their time on their own in their rooms. And finally, looking at operational support, although almost half said that they couldn't fully agree with being provided with COVID PPE, over 2/3 said they understood that companies were doing what they could, but 66%, so 2/3 said that they didn't feel that their own health and safety was being appropriately balanced with operational demands, reflected in almost 40% saying that their workload had increased. Another topic was around communication from shore to ship and not understanding the logic behind the decisions made in relation to the pandemic. So again, the third theme, the message is clear. Companies need to provide more timely and informative communications to the vessels and to seafarers. We need to bring along seafarers in the decisions that are made, help them understand why, rather than make them feel that that decisions are being done to them. Really understand the pressures, the fatigue levels and workload associated with the current situation and make allowances. We need to maintain safe operations and make sure that we understand that fatigued seafarers will not be able to perform as optimally as if in a normal situation. And finally, companies need to support seafarers home to home. So when they disembark off vessels, this shouldn't mean that the company becomes disengaged. They still need to care about the mental health and communication provision for seafarers on their way home and to the vessel. So in summary, key lessons: acknowledge the importance of seafarers as essential workers and facilitate crew change, provide better and easier access to health provisions, reduce mental health stigma, enhance company communications, have better disease management support and treatment of seafarers during and after quarantine. Apologies for probably going a little bit over time, but I hope that was interesting for you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who participated in the survey.
Thank you, Joanne. That's a very interesting question, the presentation that you've given to us with lots of insightful information. Maybe I would like to ask one short questions. Do you see any example of the mental health support from the companies?
Yes, some of the bigger companies I think are able to provide a lot of support. I've seen a particular shipping company, they provide a lot of podcasts, they provide a lot of materials and support. They have their own safety initiatives and mental health initiatives where they provide 24 hours a day mental health support. I don't think by any means that this is well, we can see from the results that this is not industry-wide, and I think where companies are much bigger, they have a much better ability to provide these. Some companies, for example, have a dedicated personal people to do these welfare checks. I think there's a lot can be learned from those type of companies.
Okay, thank you very much. The question was actually from the Professor Minami, and thank you very much for the questions.
Thank you.
Okay, if you unshare the screen, yes, we can now move to the panel discussion. So can I ask all the panelists to put on your videos? Yes. Okay, so the time is very short, despite the very interesting discussions that could be expected. And there is a lot of quite interesting questions coming from the audience. I'd like to probably take two questions, first of all. One is from the Oscar. He's asking any proactive actions from the stakeholders, especially the shipping companies, in order to deal with these issues, any proactive actions. So that's the first questions. Maybe the second question from the Dr. Amos, it's also a bit similar, but any best practices from the shipping companies that you have actually come across? Anybody wants to contribute?
I think I've probably answered from my perspective already in terms of the company best practices.
Anybody wants to add? I think that some of the best practices is where the leadership comes from the senior managers. So where we have in the companies, you know, even right up to their vision and the statement and the organisational culture. If you have senior leaders that are really focused on making sure that the mental health and welfare of seafarers is a top priority, then that can feed down to the senior leaders on the vessels. Obviously, there tends to be some bottlenecks sometimes between the two, but you know, it really does, in my view, start with senior leaders and having them understand and enact that. So it's also linking to the human element and the leadership issues. Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
In our data, I think it was hard to see any best practices and proactive actions, because in our questions we focused more on the problems that people experience. So we have more data on what went wrong, actually. However, there seemed to be a lot of variation between companies. So some noted actually that in other companies, things seem to go much better than in their own companies. And some had some examples about crew changes where the company actually went to great lengths to organize crew changes in a way that was as smoothly as possible. For example, having, if seafarers had to be in quarantine for a long time, then they had a group of seafarers who were together in quarantine so that they wouldn't be on their own traveling and going through all these difficulties. Another point that came up more implicitly also was that many thought that they missed that the company would really show that they cared for them, not just with symbolic letters saying, oh, we care for you and you make a great effort, but really meaning what they say. And so not just having it on paper, but actually having it more tangible and credible that they cared.
Yes.
I would add something, although my data are qualitative data and I didn't look at best practice, but I had participants who actually blamed a company. And I saw one question about companies versus governments. In some cases, they said that company is doing nothing, and that the company doesn't understand the problem, and that it doesn't do enough for their well-being. Some of them said that COVID is an excuse for not doing anything about crew changes. So I think that it is huge variability between different companies, but I've seen bad examples in my data.
Okay, so we will actually see more poor examples rather than the best practices. And also actually the question was about best practices on board, anything that seafarers are doing by themselves to support with each other. Helen, do you have any insights on this?
I think similar to Birgit, most of our kind of findings were quite pessimistic and quite negative, to be honest. Again, that's kind of not surprising. It was a sort of self-administered questionnaire, though, and obviously we know people tend to kind of complete these things if they've got issues or an axe to grind or that kind of thing. And not, you know, people generally don't complete questionnaires if things are going really well and they're really happy with things. So yeah, there was some examples of this kind of like we're all in it together kind of thing and being supportive like that. But a lot of it was that they really felt that they were forgotten. Again, similar to several of the presenters, we had lots of kind of analogies with prison, and that they were being treated as slaves, and basically that rights and that kind of thing were very much being eroded. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, Johan.
I also think that, you know, we have to account for the fact that we've got multinational crewing as well, and we have different nationalities on board that have different ways of talking to each other and getting through things like the pandemic. You know, we have our Filipino counterparts, for example. They're very good. They tend to be, this is a sweeping statement, so correct me if you disagree, but tend to be very good at talking to each other and opening up, or at least having one person on board that they like to talk to. But then there are other nationalities who very much don't share and don't open their emotions to other people, and I think they will have their own challenges.
Yes, thank you very much. I think also you mentioned about multinational crews, Johan. This also relates to the next questions, which come from the Dr. Brijandra. Mentioning about that maybe our research findings are more Eurocentric. But I think some of the studies are covering the non-European seafarers. So would you like to talk about this, about the data? Anybody wants to explain any non-European perspectives or insights on this matter?
Maybe I can just show in more detail my slide with nationalities. So you may here see, although the sample was convenient and it is not good representative for the whole population of seafarers, but we had seafarers from non-European countries also. I don't know if you can see details, but we had participants from USA, Brazil, Philippines, and other countries, Canada. But I didn't do any comparisons between countries, so I won't go that far.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for sharing. It is clearly that your respondents are coming from all over the world, and also probably we are presenting a preliminary finding. So I think many of us haven't done the comparative analysis, or even we are not sure if it's possible because of the sample size.
Yeah, in our data, we see a lot. We have, I think, respondents from over 40 countries. And many of our respondents are from the Philippines, as you might expect, because they are a large percentage of the seafarers worldwide. We also have more Europeans than would be in a representative sample, but we also have people from all kinds of other countries around the world. And what we found is that, well, we haven't done, as Momoko said, the detailed analysis yet, but what we see is that things like how long people have been on board often is a very strong factor. So I would expect that this might have more effect than maybe nationality maybe also because it correlates with nationality, and so for some nationalities it is more difficult to have crew changes than for others. So in that sense, nationality might matter through the crew changes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, if there is no more comments, maybe I will move to the next questions, which actually came to our alumni office before the webinar. Thank you, Captain Chukudu Lawrence, the alumni of WMUS 15. He's asking about, so the COVID-19 is just, we can say that it is one of the unforeseen events happen to all of us. So there would be many other similar challenges, unforeseen challenges in the maritime industry. So what we can actually learn from these lessons, and what the industry can prepare for in order to support the key workers, obviously the seafarers. Does anybody wants to talk about it?
I can try a start. I think in many ways this is the $100 million question that we are all asking ourselves, like how can you avoid such situations in the future, because it's leads to such a desperate situation for so many people. And I think the answer would probably be at two levels. On the one hand, I think what we see is that the crisis increases many of the problems that are in the industry before the pandemic, and makes them and highlights them even more, and makes them even more serious than they were before. So in that sense, I think going back to many of the suggestions that were earlier for improving the life of the crew on board, even in normal situations, would help to build resilience and give them the and avoid work overload, avoid fatigue, and all these things. Job security would be a very important one, I think. I think all of this would help crews to be resilient, have good leadership on board, allow time for social life on board, to build the possibility to have to have social interactions, and to build good relationships on board, so that people can support each other when they are on board. And this is also related to somebody asked about best practices. This is something that we see from our data. Some of the best practices include that people try to have, if possible, based on their workload, to have some social life together, captains who try to explain the situation to the crew and so on. That's on the one side, that supports the crew, but also on the other hand, to some extent there needs to be better collaboration between countries and governments and all the different actors involved in this. And yeah, that's a complex issue, so I'm not sure I have more of a solution there, but yeah, that's definitely something to look at for the future, I think.
Thank you, Birgit.
Yeah, maybe Momoko, I can add a couple of things to support Birgit's cases. I think the biggest problem was what we learned from the industry. The regional solutions, they don't work. The silo approach, it doesn't work. So it's a global pandemic. We need a better collaboration at international level. Because we have seen lots of examples, it didn't work. Some countries, they recognize seafarers as key workers, some didn't. Even though some, yes, okay, they are key workers, still they fail to act in a certain way. And so it just leads to more catastrophic examples we kept hearing in our survey, through our contacts, clients. And we need a better collaboration at international level. I think that's the key thing for the future.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. May I also ask the other quite common questions from the audience, which is that do we actually have some kind of baseline study, so before the COVID, the situation of the seafarers, the mental health and well-being, and or even if you don't have them, do you actually see that the situation of well-being of seafarers is getting worse during the COVID? Compared to, is there the data speaks something about it?
So I would say that they're in terms of, I won't speak for the other panelists, but the UK Chamber of Shipping and Mission to Seafarers, they have the happiness index, so that that has been running for a number of years, so that can be used as a relative baseline. In terms of what we hear, I mean, we work a lot, myself and Vulcan work a lot with maritime clients, ship companies, containers, tankers, cruise lines, and we see that this, you know, the mental health, the poorer mental health on vessels, just culture, having people having access to training as to how people see themselves in terms of fatigue and mental health, and see others and support each other, along with balance of things like workload during normal times. All of these things are not new. I think they are exacerbated by the pandemic, and you know, over the last couple of years I've certainly seen a raised profile of mental health in seafarers, and people trying to look at the human element in shipping. I think that this pandemic has massively highlighted that, and I'm really hoping that the focus now will really be helping both seafarers and office workers within the maritime industry.
Thank you, Joanne. Any quick comments from the other panelists?
I would also just highlight the last word that she said. I don't have a comparison between data before and now, but this situation really make stressors in seafaring more visible now. For example, non-respect of contract was a stressor before COVID, also presented in some companies, but now it was just longer, for months longer.
Yes, thank you. I think also that in general, the other studies like from the McKinsey highlights that the people who are vulnerable in the societies that tend to be affected more by the COVID-19. So that's also suggests that the seafarers are also in this case. So I think that now the time is actually coming to the end. So although there are many questions that are coming to the chat and also the Q&A, I think we are getting all the questions later, and we will try to answer some of the questions that if we can later on, and also the presentation slides and the videos should be available online when it is ready. So let me also share the final thank you slide to end this webinar. By the way, if anyone is actually participating from the non-European continent, actually we have another webinar in the Asia Pacific time zone on the Thursday, 10th of December 2020, which is hosted by Australian Maritime Safety Agency, not WMU at this time, but it is actually exactly the same content that we delivered today, but probably the Q&A and the discussion might be, of course, different with a different audience. The time has not yet settled. However, if you are interested, also please join, and also please distribute the information with your professional network. We would appreciate that. So, and also we put the contact email address of each speakers from today's webinar. So if you have any specific needs to communicate with the speakers, please do not hesitate to use these emails for the communication means. And I think that's all for today, if I'm not forgotten anything. So I would like to thank you for all the panelists today to participate. Actually, this is a very innovative way to collaborate and trying to learn with each other. And we are still having these severe challenges under the COVID-19. So, but we are kind of getting used to this kind of online connection. So it works quite well. And also on behalf of the World Maritime University, we thank the participants to come and join us today and also provide insightful feedback to our study. And we will we hope to take it forward, and some of the results will be published either by report or probably the academic publications. So, thank you very much once again, and hope that you are safe and secure and all good. Thank you very much for today, and bye now.